At my 65th birthday dinner, my wife's daughter raised her glass and announced to 50 guests, "As long as he's alive, my brother and I will never have to worry about money." When I asked her to apologize, my wife tightened her grip around my wrist. "She's not your daughter. Don't you dare correct her." I smiled and said, "All right." Before sunrise, I made a series of quiet phone calls. By mid-morning, her cards had stopped working. Her tuition was gone, her monthly allowance had vanished, and the BMW was being reclaimed. Then she called me furious and panicked. "I'm so grateful you chose to spend this time here. Quick question before we start. What city or country are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. You're part of the Dad Family Revenge family now." Note: this story includes fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but what this story teaches you is not. I have attended a great many dinners in my 65 years. Business dinners where contracts worth millions sat beneath small talk about golf handicaps and California wine. Retirement dinners where colleagues shook my hand and said things they mostly meant. Anniversary dinners where Eleanor would reach across the white tablecloth and squeeze my fingers without saying a word, because after 35 years together, she had learned that some moments were better held than spoken. But the dinner at the Spire restaurant in Beverly Hills on that Saturday evening in December of 2024 was unlike any I had attended before, because it was the first dinner in my life where I truly understood what it meant to be used. The private dining room on the second floor held 50 guests comfortably. Denise had arranged everything: the centerpieces of white and gold, the place cards in her careful handwriting, the three-course menu she had spent 2 weeks selecting. She had wanted this birthday to be memorable, she told me. She had wanted everyone who mattered to see that Gerald Hutchison at 65 was a man who still had everything. And looking around that room in the early part of the evening, I believed her. Old colleagues from my years as CFO at Meridian Manufacturing raised their glasses. Arthur Sloan, who had been my business partner for nearly 2 decades, caught my eye from across the table and gave me the kind of nod that meant he was genuinely glad to be there. My son Ryan had flown in from Manhattan and was laughing at something the man beside him had said, and the sound of his laughter made my chest feel warm in a way that nothing else quite could. Denise sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm, and she was radiant. That was the word people used about her, and it was accurate. She had a way of making a room feel like it had been waiting for her to arrive. Her daughter Ashley arrived 40 minutes after the appetizers, sweeping into the room in a cream-colored coat that I had helped pay for at Christmas, carrying a handbag that I recognized from a receipt I had signed the previous spring. She kissed her mother on the cheek, waved at the table with the cheerful vagueness of someone who had somewhere better to be, and settled into her seat beside her brother Brandon. Brandon Holloway was 38 years old, broad-shouldered, and wore his confidence the way some men wore expensive cologne, too much of it, and you noticed it before anything else. He ran a logistics company out of Torrance and spoke about it often, always in the tone of a man on the verge of something enormous. He shook my hand firmly when I greeted him, called me Gerald, the way he always did, never Dad, never anything warmer, and turned back to his phone. I told myself patience was part of what it meant to love someone whose children came with history I hadn't been part of. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. Arthur told a story about a real estate deal that had gone sideways in Phoenix, and the table laughed. Ryan asked Denise about the renovation she had planned for the guest bathroom, and she answered with genuine enthusiasm. I watched the room and felt something close to contentment. The specific fragile contentment of a man who has been lonely for a long time and has finally cautiously allowed himself to believe it might be over. Eleanor had been gone for 10 years, a decade of evenings that ended too quietly, a decade of cooking for one, and finding her reading glasses on the nightstand, and having to remind myself each time that she wasn't coming back to look for them. When I met Denise at a charity event 2 years ago, something in me had simply opened. I was not a foolish man, but grief, I had learned, had a way of making even careful men careless in specific ways. The birthday cake arrived at 8:30. 50 candles which Denise insisted on, and the table sang with the particular enthusiasm of people who had eaten well and drunk freely. I blew out the candles to a round of applause. Ryan whooped from across the table, and I laughed a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere genuine. That was when Ashley raised her glass. She had been drinking steadily since she arrived, and her cheeks carried the high color of someone several glasses past careful. She stood, which was not something anyone had asked her to do, and she tapped her glass with a dessert fork until the table quieted. "I just want to say," she began, her voice bright and carrying, "that everyone here should feel very good about the future of this family." She smiled around the table with the particular warmth of someone who believes she is being charming. "Because Gerald, our Gerald, is basically the family retirement fund." She paused for effect, letting the words settle. "As long as he's breathing and his credit score holds up, Brandon and I are going to be just fine." A few people laughed, the uncomfortable, reflexive laughter of guests who weren't sure whether they were meant to find something funny. I watched Arthur Sloane's expression change from amusement to something more careful, his eyes moving to me with a look that asked a question he was too polite to voice aloud. Brandon raised his glass without hesitation. His voice was easy, almost amused. "She's just telling the truth." I set my fork down. The tines made a small, clear sound against the china. "Ashley," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, "I think you should apologize." Her eyebrows rose. She tilted her head as though I had said something genuinely puzzling. "For what I'm complimenting you, Gerald. You're very financially stable." "You turned my birthday dinner into a joke at my expense," I said, "in front of my colleagues and my son. I'd like an apology." Her mouth opened to respond, and that was when Denise stood up. She reached across and wrapped her fingers around my wrist. Her grip was firm, deliberate. She was not touching me to comfort me. She was touching me to stop me. "She is not your daughter," Denise said. Her voice was clear and controlled, pitched to carry. Every conversation at the table stopped. "Don't you dare correct her." The room went very still. I looked down at Denise's hand on my wrist. My fingers had gone cold, the way they always did in air conditioning, and her grip pressed against the joint in a way that sent a dull ache up toward my elbow. Across the table, Ryan had stopped smiling. His jaw was tight. Arthur Sloane held his wine glass without drinking from it, watching me with an expression I would think about later, not surprise exactly. Something closer to recognition. I looked at Denise. I looked at the certainty in her face, the absolute confidence that she was correct, that she had said the right thing, that she had said it the right way. Then I looked at my wrist, still caught in her hand, and I thought of something my father had told me when I was young. He said that the most important thing a man could do when someone showed him exactly who they were was to believe them the first time. I gently removed my wrist from her grip. "All right," I said. I picked up my fork. I finished my cake. I thanked the guests as they left, shook the right hands and kissed the right cheeks. Ryan pulled me aside near the coat check and started to say something, and I squeezed his shoulder and told him I was fine, and we both knew I wasn't, and neither of us pushed it. On the drive home through Beverly Hills, Denise talked about whether the cake had been as good as the one from the bakery on Wilshire. I watched the streetlights passing and thought about my father's Patek Philippe watch, sitting in the safe at home where I had kept it for 20 years. I had always told myself I was saving it for the right moment. Driving through those quiet December streets, I began to understand that the right moment wasn't going to look the way I had imagined. I woke at 5:47. The bedroom was dark, except for the thin gray line of December light pressing under the curtains. Denise was still asleep, her breathing slow and even one hand curled beneath her cheek, the way it always was. I looked at her for a moment, really looked the way you look at something when you are trying to decide whether what you believed about it is still true. And then I got up, quietly pulled on my robe, and went downstairs. The kitchen was cold. I turned on the single light above the stove, the one Eleanor had always called the civilized option, because it didn't assault you at 6 in the morning, and I made coffee. While it brewed, I stood at the window and looked out at the backyard. The jacaranda tree near the fence had dropped most of its leaves. The pool cover was dark with morning dew. Everything was exactly as it had been the night before. I poured my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table, and opened my phone. For 40 years, I had made my living reading numbers. As the chief financial officer of Meridian Manufacturing, I had walked into boardrooms where the air was thick with anxiety and laid out the facts with the particular calm of a man who understood that emotion was expensive and clarity was cheap. I had restructured budgets that other people had spent months defending. I had canceled contracts that felt personal because the math said they were not sustainable. What I was about to do felt very personal. The math said it was entirely sustainable. I called the bank first. The representative who answered had a young voice, professional and alert, even at that hour. I explained that I needed to cancel a supplementary credit card on my account, the one issued to a Miss Ashley Holloway. There was a brief pause, the sound of keys, and then it was done. Effective immediately, he said. I thanked him and ended the call. The second call went to the bursar's office at Ashley's University. I left a message clearly worded requesting confirmation that I was withdrawing my commitment to cover the spring semester tuition. I gave my account number and my callback information. I kept my voice the way I kept it in boardrooms, level, factual, and entirely without apology. Third, call the insurance company. I removed Ashley from my policy. The agent walked me through the steps with practiced efficiency, the way people do when they have had this conversation before and understand that it does not require commentary. Fourth, call the leasing office of Ashley's apartment complex. I informed them that the automatic payment from my account, covering her monthly rent, would not be renewed. They had 30 days of notice, which was more than the lease required of me. The property manager thanked me in a tone that suggested he had at some point in his career been on the other end of this kind of phone call. Fifth call, Ashley's phone carrier. I was the account holder. I requested that her line be suspended pending transfer to a new account in her own name. The representative offered to handle the transfer directly, and I declined. I said I wanted the suspension processed today, and it was. By 7:15, I had also canceled the monthly allowance transfer, notified the auto insurance company to remove Ashley's coverage, and left a message with the dealership that held the title to the BMW. She drove a white 3 Series that I had co-signed 18 months ago, and that remained legally and entirely in my name. That last one required a brief explanation about California's vehicle repossession process. Under California law, reclaiming a vehicle registered in my name required notifying the lien holder and the registered operator, then initiating a formal retrieval through a licensed repossession agency. The process typically took between 7 and 10 business days to complete the necessary paperwork. The dealership's finance manager confirmed they would begin immediately. In the meantime, Ashley would receive formal written notice that the vehicle was being recalled by its registered owner, 7 and 10 days. I noted that window and moved on. By 8:42, I had made 11 calls. I sat back in my chair and looked at my coffee, which had gone cold while I worked. Outside, the December morning had brightened into something thin and pale. A neighbor's sprinklers had come on down the street. Somewhere past the fence, a mockingbird was making the particular racket that mockingbirds make when they are angry at something they cannot identify. I knew exactly how that felt. At 9:14, my phone rang. Ashley's name lit up the screen, and I answered on the second ring. "My card isn't working." Her voice was sharp, awake, furious in the way that people are furious when they have been inconvenienced before they have been guilty. "I'm at the Grove, and I tried to buy coffee, and it got declined, in front of everyone." "I know," I said. A pause. When she spoke again, the sharpness had taken on a different edge. "What do you mean you know? I canceled it this morning." "You—" She stopped. I could hear her breathing quick and tight. Gerald, you can't just cancel my card without telling me. I don't have another one on me. I can't even get home." "You have your own cards," I said, "and your own bank account. That's not the point." Her voice cracked, not with grief, but with outrage, which is a different thing entirely. "You're doing this because of last night. You're seriously doing this because of one stupid joke at dinner." "Your mother told me you're not my daughter," I said. "I'm simply taking her at her word. You're not my daughter, Ashley, which means you're not my financial responsibility." "That is not what she meant, and you know it." "She said it clearly in front of 50 people, I said. "I heard her perfectly." "So this is revenge." Her voice had gone from outrage into something raw, and I could hear the specific tremor of someone who has just realized that the ground they were standing on was not as solid as they believed. "You're punishing me because she defended me." "I'm not punishing you," I said, and I meant it. "I'm adjusting to the situation as it was defined for me. You have a father, Ashley. He can help you from here." She hung up before I could finish the sentence. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. I set the phone down on the table and looked at the cold coffee. Then I got up, poured it down the sink, and made a fresh cup. At 9:47, Denise appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was still in her robe, her hair loose, and her face carried the particular arrangement of someone who had been awake long enough to formulate a position. Her eyes went to my phone on the table, then to my face, and she pressed her lips together in a way that told me she had already spoken to Ashley. "What did you do?" she asked, and her voice had the careful control of someone choosing each word the way you choose steps on uncertain ground. "I made 12 phone calls," I said. "Gerald." She stepped into the kitchen, and her voice rose just enough to carry the weight of warning. "Ashley is upset. She's stranded at the Grove without any way to pay for anything. Brandon had to drive across town to pick her up." "That was kind of Brandon," I said. "This is not funny." "I'm not laughing," I said. And I wasn't. I was standing at my kitchen counter in Bel Air on a Sunday morning, holding a cup of coffee, watching the woman I had married look at me like I had done something incomprehensible. "You told me in front of everyone we know that Ashley is not my daughter, and that I had no right to correct her. I agreed with you. She is not my daughter. I should not have been paying her bills." Denise's jaw tightened. A vein in her temple moved in a way I had never noticed before, and I thought with the detached clarity that sometimes comes after a sleepless night, that I was seeing something I had not been meant to see. "You are being vindictive," she said. "You are punishing a young woman because she made a joke at dinner." "She called me a retirement fund," I said, "in front of my son and my colleagues, and you held my wrist and told me to stay in my place." I paused. "I'm not being vindictive, Denise. I'm being consistent." She stared at me for a long moment, her chest rising and falling quickly, and then she turned and walked back toward the hallway. At the door, she stopped without turning around. "Brandon is going to call you," she said. "You should think very carefully about what you say to him." I looked at my phone on the table. Then I picked up my coffee and took a slow, deliberate sip. "I'll be here," I said. I had no way of knowing, standing in that kitchen on that quiet December morning, that Brandon's call would be the least of what was coming. Brandon Holloway called at 11 that morning and arrived at my front door by 2 in the afternoon, which told me he had been planning what to say during the drive over rather than on the phone. Men who are genuinely angry call back immediately. Men who are calculating give themselves travel time. I was wearing a jacket, despite the mild December afternoon, and his handshake when I opened the door was the kind that holds on a half-second too long. A dominance move. I had seen it in boardrooms for 40 years. "We need to talk," he said. "Come in," I said. We sat in the living room. Denise had made herself scarce, which told me they had coordinated. Brandon leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his jaw working slightly before he spoke, like an engine turning over before it caught. "What you did this morning was out of line," he said. "Ashley called me in tears. She couldn't even get home from the Grove. You humiliated her." "Ashley humiliated me in front of 50 people last night," I said. "At my own birthday dinner. She was drinking. She didn't mean it the way it came out." "She meant enough of it to say it out loud," I replied. "And your mother meant every word she said to me afterward." Brandon's jaw tightened. He stood up and moved toward the window, which was another boardroom move. Put distance between yourself and the problem. Make the other person feel like they're being assessed from a height. I had used it myself back when I was younger, and still believed that posture could substitute for argument. "You need to restore Ashley's accounts by end of day," he said. "The card, the tuition, the allowance, all of it." "No," I said. He turned. His eyes were sharp, and for just a moment, a fraction of a second, I saw something flicker behind them that wasn't anger. It was closer to panic. He covered it quickly, but I had spent 4 decades watching people manage their faces in high-pressure rooms. I had seen it. "Gerald." His voice dropped, going quiet in the way that people go quiet when they want to sound reasonable but feel desperate. "Ashley is still in school. She depends on that support. She depends on it." I agreed. "That's the problem. You made a commitment. Your mother told me clearly that Ashley is not my daughter and that I had no right to correct her." I kept my voice even. "I honored that. Ashley is not my daughter, which means she is not my obligation." Brandon stared at me. His hands, I noticed, were not entirely still. His right thumb pressed against his palm in a slow, rhythmic way, the kind of nervous habit a person doesn't know they have until someone watches them closely enough. "You're going to face consequences for this," he said. The words came out flat without the heat of a real threat, which somehow made them worse, like he was reading from a list he had prepared. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. He left without shaking my hand. I stood at the window and watched his car pull out of the driveway, a late-model Escalade least I happened to know, on terms that stretched uncomfortably relative to his company's reported revenue. Another number I had noticed, without meaning to. That evening, Ryan called from his hotel room downtown. He'd decided to stay an extra night rather than fly back. "How are you doing, Dad?" he asked. And the gentleness in his voice, the specific, careful gentleness of a son who is worried but doesn't want to push, made my throat tighten in a way that nothing else that day had managed. "I'm fine," I said. "I made some decisions this morning that needed making." "I know," he said. "I saw what happened last night. I should have said something." "You didn't need to," I told him. "It wasn't yours to handle." After we hung up, I sat on the back porch in the cool evening air. My neighbor Sandra Kowalski was deadheading her roses on the other side of the fence, and she looked up when she heard the door. "Rough weekend?" she asked. Sandra was 71, direct in the way that people get when they've stopped having patience for indirection, and she had lived next door for 11 years. "Instructive," I said. She snorted. "That bad." She clipped another dead bloom and tossed it into her basket. "You want company or quiet?" "Quiet with company," I said. She nodded and kept working, and I sat there while the December sky went from orange to gray to dark, and I thought about the numbers I had started pulling up on my laptop before Brandon arrived. The account statements, the transfers I had noticed but not yet examined closely. Something in those numbers didn't sit right. I had the feeling I always got in the early stages of an audit, that particular low hum of wrongness, before you find exactly where the problem lives. I went back inside and opened the laptop again. I did not go to bed that night. By 2 in the morning I had pulled up 22 months of bank statements and spread them across 3 browser windows, the way I used to spread quarterly reports across my desk at Meridian when something wasn't adding up, and I needed to see everything at once. 40 years as a CFO teaches you to read numbers the way other people read faces. You learn what healthy cash flow looks like, what stagnation looks like, what deliberate concealment looks like. The patterns become instinct. And sitting at my kitchen table in the dark, with only the laptop screen for light, every instinct I had was firing. The first thing I found was the tuition transfers. I had been sending money to Ashley's university account. Every semester amounts I had agreed to, amounts I had verified. But cross-referencing the wire confirmations against the university's posted payment records, I found a gap. Roughly 30% of what I had transferred had not registered as tuition payments. It had moved somewhere else first. That somewhere else, when I traced it, connected to a business account registered to Brandon Holloway's logistics company. I sat with that for a long moment. My coffee had gone cold. Outside, a car moved slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen ceiling, and then the dark came back. I kept going. The monthly allowance transfers told a similar story. Small amounts redirected. Timing that didn't match Ashley's spending patterns. A deposit here, a transfer there, individually, unremarkable, collectively, forming a current that ran consistently in one direction, toward Brandon. By 4 in the morning, I had filled 2 pages of a legal pad with figures, dates, and account references. The total I circled at the bottom made my jaw tighten. I had been paying for Ashley's life, but someone had been quietly skimming the margins for the better part of 2 years. I picked up my phone and called Nathan Pierce at 6 in the morning. Nathan had been my attorney for 11 years. He answered on the 3rd ring, which told me he had been awake already. "Nathan," I said, "I need you at your office by 8. Bring whoever you trust with financial forensics." A pause. "How bad?" I looked at the legal pad. "I don't know yet. Bad enough that I'm calling you at 6 on a Sunday." "I'll be there," he said, and hung up without asking anything else. That was why I had kept Nathan Pierce for 11 years. I closed the laptop, stood up, and stretched the stiffness out of my lower back. Through the kitchen window, the first pale light of Monday morning was beginning to show above the rooftops. I thought about Brandon's hands during our conversation, that thumb pressing rhythmically into his palm. I had read it as nerves. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. Not the nervousness of a man who was angry. The nervousness of a man who needed something very badly and was running out of time to get it. Victor Reynolds would tell me exactly how right I was. Nathan Pierce's office on the 31st floor of a Century City tower had floor-to-ceiling windows that looked west toward the Pacific. On clear days, you could see Catalina Island from his conference table. That Monday afternoon, I was not looking at the view. Victor Reynolds was standing at the head of the table. I had known Victor for 19 years, since we sat next to each other at a fundraiser in Pasadena, and discovered we both thought the keynote speaker was catastrophically wrong about interest rates. He had spent 22 years as a special agent with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division before retiring to Los Angeles, where he worked as an independent consultant for law firms and private clients who needed someone who knew how to follow money through places money was not supposed to go. I was 61 years old, built like a man who had never stopped running the morning routes he'd kept since Quantico, and he had the particular stillness of someone who had spent decades in rooms where saying the wrong thing had real consequences. He placed a single folder on the conference table and looked at me. "How much do you know about Brandon Holloway's company?" he asked. "Logistics operation out of Torrance," I said. "Mid-size. He talks about it like it's about to become something larger. It's about to become nothing at all," Victor said. He opened the folder. Brandon Holloway's company currently carries approximately $3 million in outstanding debt. Bank loans, supplier obligations, and a private lending arrangement with a group of investors based here in Los Angeles. He paused. "That last category is the one that matters. These are not patient men. They've already sent representatives to his office twice in the past month. Not to negotiate, to remind him that they exist." My chest tightened. I thought about Brandon's thumb pressing into his palm. "He's been using me," I said. Not a question. "He's been using you as a pressure valve," Victor said. "As long as money kept flowing from your accounts, he could keep his creditors at a distance. When you cut off Ashley's funding, you didn't just inconvenience him." Victor looked at me steadily. "You kicked out the last support holding the ceiling up." Nathan leaned forward from his chair at the side of the table. "Gerald, this changes the risk profile significantly. Brandon isn't simply trying to restore his sister's allowance. He needs a substantial infusion of capital in a matter of weeks, not months, weeks." I sat with that. Outside, the afternoon light was going gold over the west side. Somewhere below us, Century City moved through its ordinary Monday, entirely unaware that in this conference room a picture was assembling itself that I had been too trusting, too deliberately, willfully trusting to see before. "He planned this from the beginning," I said. Victor's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes shifted the look of a man who has learned to let people arrive at difficult truths at their own pace. "We're still establishing timelines," he said carefully, "but the pattern of financial behavior we're seeing is not consistent with recent desperation. It's consistent with extended planning." My throat felt tight. I thought about Denise at the restaurant, her hand on my wrist, her voice perfectly controlled. I thought about how precisely that moment had been designed not to humiliate me, but to draw a line, to establish in front of witnesses that I had no parental authority over Ashley, that any money I had given was voluntary, that I could be reminded of my place. "What do I do?" I asked. Nathan answered without hesitation. "You document everything. You stop all discretionary transfers immediately. And you do not, under any circumstances, let Brandon believe you know what you know." Victor closed the folder and looked at me. "Gerald, in 22 years with the Bureau, I learned one thing about people who are desperate for money." He pulled on his jacket slowly. "They do not stop. They accelerate." I drove home through the early evening traffic on the 405, the city spreading out around me in every direction, and I thought about the safe in my study. The one behind the Oregon coast painting Eleanor had chosen. The one that held $180,000 in cash, my father's Patek Philippe, and a collection of investment documents I had never thought to worry about. 2 days later, I walked into my study and the spare key was gone. My safe sat behind a landscape painting that Eleanor had chosen for our 25th anniversary. Oregon coast, she had said when she unwrapped it from the gallery's brown paper. She claimed it looked like a place where nothing bad could happen. She was usually right about things like that. Thursday morning, I noticed the spare key was gone from the hook inside my desk drawer, the one place I had kept it for 6 years without telling anyone. I stood in my study for a moment, with the drawer open, my hand resting on the empty hook, and felt the particular coldness that comes not from surprise but from confirmation. I opened the safe. The cash was gone, $180,000 in banded bills that I kept for the kind of liquidity emergencies that a man in my position occasionally needed to move on quickly. My father's Patek Philippe gone. The investment account, documents, the property certificates, the original deed to the Bel Air house, all of it gone. What remained was a single yellow sticky note I had put there 3 years ago with a reminder to call my accountant. It sat in the center of the empty shelf like a bad joke. My hands were steady when I called Nathan. I had learned a long time ago that trembling hands solve nothing, and I had 40 years of practice keeping them still when everything else was not. But my voice when Nathan answered came out lower than I intended. "The safe's been cleaned out," I said. "Don't touch anything else," Nathan said immediately. "I'm calling it in." I sat in the chair by my desk and waited. Upstairs, I could hear Denise moving. The sound of her footsteps crossing the bedroom floor, then stopping. Then her voice low and quick carrying through the ceiling in a way she likely didn't know it did. She was on the phone. I looked at my watch. I noted the time. I said nothing. Detective Luis Sandoval of the LAPD arrived 20 minutes later, a compact, careful man in his mid-40s with the measured movements of someone who has walked into enough bad situations to know that stillness is an asset. He shook my hand, introduced himself without ceremony, and began asking the kind of methodical questions that good investigators ask before they form any conclusions. He had barely finished his second question when the front door opened. Brandon walked in with Denise at his side, and a woman I didn't recognize just behind them, young, carrying a canvas tote bag, wearing the slightly over-careful expression of someone doing a job they find uncomfortable. Brandon introduced her as a caseworker from a county social services office. He did not explain why he had brought her. He didn't need to. The meaning was entirely clear. "Detective," Brandon said, with the easy authority of a man who had rehearsed this, "I want to make sure you have the full picture here. My stepfather has been experiencing some memory issues lately. He misplaces things. Last week he spent 20 minutes looking for his reading glasses. They were on his head." He paused for the right amount of time. "We've been concerned. This isn't the first time he's reported something missing that turned out to be somewhere he'd forgotten." The caseworker nodded with practiced sympathy. My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. I looked at Denise standing beside her son, her hands folded in front of her. Her expression arranged into something that on another day might have passed for genuine worry. She met my eyes for exactly 1 second, and then looked away. That 1 second told me everything. Detective Sandoval listened to Brandon with the careful neutrality that experienced officers use when they are gathering information rather than accepting it. He wrote things in his notebook. He asked the caseworker a few procedural questions. He looked at me once with an expression that I could not entirely read, not disbelief exactly, but not acceptance either. The expression of a man keeping his options open. Mr. Hutchison, Sandoval said, turning to me. Is there anything you'd like to add? Yes, I said. I know exactly where my reading glasses are. They are in the left breast pocket of my jacket, where I keep them every morning. The items missing from my safe are $180,000 in cash, a Patek Philippe watch that belonged to my father, and a collection of investment and property documents. I have not misplaced them. They were taken. Sandoval nodded slowly and wrote that down too. He left without making any arrests, which I had expected. He didn't have enough yet, and I understood that. Evidence takes time to build. I had spent enough years reading financial investigations to know that the first report is rarely the last one. After everyone had gone, I walked back into my study and stood in front of the open safe, the Oregon coast painting hung beside it, Eleanor's careful choice, the pale colors of a shoreline that looked like nothing bad could happen there. That evening, Sandra Kowalski knocked on my back door. She was holding a covered plate of something that smelled like pot roast, and her expression had the directness of a woman who does not knock on doors without a reason. I saw a man going into your house last week, she said before I could even offer her coffee. Tuesday, I think. Maybe Wednesday. I thought he was a repairman. He had one of those company shirts on, you know, the kind with a logo on the chest. She frowned. But he didn't have a truck. Repairmen always have trucks. My chest went very still. Can you describe him? I asked. She did, and I wrote down every word. Before I go further, if you're still here with me, drop a 7 in the comments right now. 7 for the 7 things I wish I had known before I trusted the wrong person. I read every single comment, and tonight I want to know you're still in this with me. Welcome back to Dad Family Revenge. Just a reminder, this story contains some fictional elements woven in for storytelling purposes. Names, places, and certain details have been adjusted. If that's not your preference, no judgment at all. Victor called on a Tuesday morning, and I recognized the particular flatness in his voice before he had finished his first sentence. It was the tone he used when he was about to tell me something. He genuinely wished he didn't have to say, not because it was complicated, but because it was the kind of truth that once spoken could not be made smaller again. I need you to sit down, he said. I'm already sitting, I told him. Good. A pause. Do you remember the night you met Denise? I remembered it clearly. A charity fundraiser at the Getty Museum about 2 years ago. October, I thought, one of those warm Los Angeles evenings when the light turned everything gold and the city looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted you to believe in second chances. Denise had been standing near the terrace railing in a navy dress, looking out at the view, and something about the way she held herself quietly, without performing it, had made me cross the room. I remember, I said. That evening was not accidental, Victor said. Brandon researched you. Your financial profile, your social calendar, your public event appearances. He knew you would be at the Getty that night. He arranged for Denise to be there. In position. In the navy dress. Another pause, heavier this time. I found the messages, Gerald, between Brandon and Denise, sent 4 days before the event. My throat closed. I sat very still in my chair and listened. Victor read one of the messages aloud. Brandon had written, he'll be at the Getty Friday. Wear the navy dress. Be warm. Take your time. This only works if it feels real. The room felt strange for a moment. Too bright, too quiet, the familiar walls of my study looking somehow like a set that had been built around me while I wasn't paying attention. Gerald. Victor's voice came through, careful and steady. I want you to hear me say this directly. What you felt was real. What she made you feel was manufactured, but your response to it, the loneliness, the hope, the willingness to try again that was entirely real. There is no version of this where you were foolish. There is only a version where someone studied you long enough to know exactly which door to knock on. My eyes burned. I pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of my nose and breathed slowly the way I had learned to do in high-pressure meetings when the numbers were bad and the room was watching, and falling apart was not an option. How long, I asked. How long was this planned? At least 14 months before you married, Victor said. Possibly longer. I thought about Denise sitting beside me at that first dinner after the Getty, laughing at something I'd said about interest rates. I thought about the way she had looked at me across restaurant tables and hotel lobbies and the kitchen of this house, and how I had told myself, how I had genuinely believed that I was finally being seen again the way Eleanor had seen me. Eleanor had never needed instructions. She had never been told which dress to wear. I'll keep digging, Victor said, but I wanted you to know before it went further. I thanked him and set the phone down. Sandra appeared at my back door 20 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee she had carried across the yard, which told me she had been watching my kitchen window and had seen something in my face through the glass that concerned her. She set 1 cup in front of me without a word and sat down across the table. Something happened, she said. It was not a question. Someone studied me, I said, before I ever knew they existed. They figured out what I needed, and they built a door that looked exactly like it. Sandra wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Her knuckles were slightly swollen from arthritis, and the gesture had the deliberateness of someone who is choosing not to reach across and pat your hand, because they know you need words more than comfort right now. You know what my husband used to say, she said. He said the cruelest con is the one that uses a real feeling to run a fake game. Because when it's over, you don't just feel robbed. She looked at me steadily. You feel like the feeling itself was wrong, and it wasn't. The feeling was the only honest thing in the whole transaction. I stared at my coffee. Gerald, she said, go to that church you drove past last week, the one on Wilshire with the blue doors. I've seen you slow down in front of it twice. I looked at her. You notice a lot. I'm 71 and I live alone, she said. Noticing is how I stay interested. That afternoon, I drove to the church on Wilshire and sat in the 3rd pew from the back for 20 minutes before a man came and sat 2 rows ahead of me, not intrusively, just present. He turned after a while and introduced himself as Reverend Thomas Ward, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, with a voice like warm gravel and eyes that had the quality of someone who had heard a great many things without being destroyed by them. You don't have to explain anything, he said. Most people who come in and sit in the 3rd pew from the back aren't here to talk. I'm not sure why I'm here, I said honestly. That's usually a good reason to stay a few minutes, he said. We sat together in the quiet of that old building until the light through the blue stained glass shifted from afternoon gold to something cooler, and I felt not better exactly, but less like the walls were closing in. 3 days after Victor's call, I learned that Brandon wasn't simply stealing from me. He was building a legal case to make certain no one would believe me when I found out. The calls started on Wednesday. A colleague from my years at Meridian Manufacturing rang to ask with the careful cheerfulness of someone navigating a minefield whether I was thinking about slowing down. A client I had worked with for 8 years emailed to confirm our next quarterly meeting, then added a postscript, gently worded, clearly uncomfortable to write, saying he had heard I had been under considerable stress lately and wanted to make sure everything was all right. Then my banker called. Marcus Tully had processed my routine wire transfers for 11 years. He handled the day-to-day transactions at the branch level. A different role entirely from Claire Morgan, who managed my private banking portfolio upstairs. Marcus called my cell phone directly that Wednesday morning and said with genuine awkwardness that the branch had received a notification suggesting I might benefit from an in-person verification of some recent account activity. I asked him who had submitted the notification. He paused for too long before saying he wasn't able to share that information. I thanked him, told him I would come in at the end of the week, and called Nathan the moment I hung up. "Someone contacted your bank," Nathan said when I told him. "Probably Denise by phone suggesting you've been confused about transactions. Banks have a standard protocol when they receive that kind of report from a family member. They flag the account and request in-person verification before processing large transfers. It's designed to protect elderly clients from fraud." He stopped. "In this case, it's being used to manufacture the appearance of a man who can't manage his own finances." "Can they freeze my accounts on that basis?" I asked. "Not freeze. Not yet. But if they receive a court order, yes." Nathan's voice tightened. "Gerald Brandon filed a petition yesterday with the Los Angeles Superior Court. He's requesting that the court appoint Denise as your conservator, your legal guardian over financial matters. Under California's probate code, a conservatorship gives the appointed person full control over bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate, and business decisions." I sat with that for a moment. My entire financial life, the accounts, the properties, the 40 years of careful building handed to the woman who had been placed in front of me at a fundraiser wearing a navy dress and specific instructions. "Who's the judge?" I asked. "Judge Patricia Okafor, Los Angeles Superior Court," Nathan said. "Hearing is scheduled in 3 weeks. Gerald, they've also retained a neuropsychologist to evaluate you. A Dr. James Whitfield with an office in Westwood. The court requires an independent medical opinion in conservatorship cases. Brandon is providing his own." 2 days later, I sat across a desk from Dr. James Whitfield in a beige office that smelled of new carpet and effort. He was a thin man in his early 60s, with frameless glasses and the specific brand of professional warmth that felt like it had been calibrated rather than felt. He asked me to identify the current date. I told him. He asked me to count backward from 100 by sevens. I did it without pausing. He asked me to name 3 objects, then recall them 12 minutes later after a series of other questions. I named them correctly in order on the first try. He wrote things in his notepad throughout, and his expression gave me nothing. When the session ended, he shook my hand and said he would submit his findings to the court within 10 days. Walking out to my car in the Westwood parking structure, I called Victor and told him about Whitfield. "Get me his full name and the name of his practice," Victor said immediately. "Don't sign anything that office sends you. Don't respond to any communications from Whitfield. Directly route everything through Nathan." "You think something is wrong with him?" I said. It was not a question. "I think Brandon spent $45,000 on a medical opinion," Victor said. "I want to know what he bought." Meanwhile, the narrative was spreading. An acquaintance who golfed in my usual Saturday group called to say he hoped I was taking care of myself. A woman who had been on a charitable board with me for 4 years sent a card, handwritten, warm, slightly too careful, saying she was thinking of me. Each message arrived wrapped in genuine-sounding concern, and each one told me the same thing. Someone was seeding a story. Quietly, methodically, through exactly the channels that a man of my age and social position would find most difficult to publicly contradict. That evening, I went back to the church on Wilshire. Reverend Ward was locking up the side door when I arrived, and he took one look at my face and unlocked it again. "Come in," he said simply. We sat in the same pews as before. The blue-stained glass had gone dark with the evening outside. "Someone is telling people I'm losing my mind," I said. "Professionally, systematically." Reverend Obi folded his large hands in his lap and leaned forward slightly. And are you? No, I said, and the firmness in my own voice surprised me. Then the only question, he said, is whether you can prove it before they convince enough people to make it not matter. He looked at me steadily. Can you? I thought about Nathan. I thought about Victor checking Whitfield's credentials with the particular thoroughness of a man who had spent 22 years finding things people had tried to bury. I thought about the legal pad in my desk drawer with 40 years of financial instinct documented in my own handwriting. Yes, I said. Reverend Obi nodded once the way a man nods when he believes you, but wants to make sure you believe yourself. Before I could focus on what came next, something happened that put my name on every television screen in Los Angeles. Ashley had found the spare key to the BMW before the repossession paperwork cleared. I had initiated the repossession on Sunday morning, knowing the process carried a 7 to 10 business day window. It was now Friday evening. 3 days remained. She used every one of them. I was in my study, reviewing investment account statements, when my phone buzzed with a news alert at 9:47 that evening. The headline read, "Beverly Hills Jewelry Store Hit by Vehicle 1 Employee Injured Driver Fled Scene." I felt the specific cold that comes not from the air, but from recognition. I turned on the television. The local 11 o'clock news had footage of a white BMW 3 Series with its front end buried in the shattered glass facade of a jewelry exchange on Rodeo Drive. The damage to the storefront was extensive. One employee had been transported to Cedars-Sinai with a non-life-threatening injury. Witnesses reported the driver had left the scene immediately after impact. Then the anchor said a name I recognized. The vehicle, she said, was registered to Gerald Hutchison, 65, a former chief financial officer who had resided in the Bel Air area for over a decade. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I called Nathan before the segment had finished. He answered on the first ring, which told me he had already seen it. "Don't say anything to anyone tonight," he said immediately, his voice clipped and precise. "Don't respond to calls from numbers you don't recognize. I'll be at your house by 7 tomorrow morning." "Brandon called the insurance company," I said. "Before the police. I know he did." "Almost certainly," Nathan said. "Under California's permissive use doctrine, Vehicle Code Section 17150, a vehicle owner can be held liable for damages if they gave the driver permission to use the car. If Brandon submitted a written authorization bearing your signature, the insurance company will treat it as valid until proven otherwise." "The signature is forged," I said. "I know. But right now they don't." Nathan exhaled. "Gerald, listen carefully. First thing tomorrow, before anything else, you call Detective Sandoval directly, and you report that any authorization document bearing your signature in connection with this vehicle is a forgery. You tell him you want it on the official record. That single step removes your legal liability under the permissive use statute. Can you do that?" "I'll do it tonight," I said. "Tonight is better," Nathan agreed. I called Sandoval at 11:23. He answered, which surprised me, and I told him clearly and without preamble that I had not authorized Ashley Holloway to operate the BMW, that I had initiated repossession proceedings 5 days earlier, and that any document purporting to show my authorization was fraudulent. I gave him the name of the repossession agency and the date the process had begun. Sandoval listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said he would note it in the incident report and follow up in the morning. By the time I turned the television off, Marcus Webb of the Los Angeles Times had already posted a piece online. The byline read, "Vehicle owned by former CFO Gerald Hutchison involved in Beverly Hills hit and run." The article was 3 paragraphs. My name appeared twice. I sat in the dark of my study for a long time, the laptop screen the only light in the room. My chest felt like something heavy had been set on it, and left there. I thought about 40 years of building a name carefully, honestly, in the particular unglamorous way that financial work requires, one correct number at a time, and how quickly that name could be attached to something ugly when someone decided to use it that way. Ryan called at midnight from New York. His voice was tight with the specific controlled worry of a man who has been awake since the news alert hit his phone. "Dad," he said, "I saw the news." "It's not what it looks like," I told him. "I know it isn't." His voice broke slightly at the edges, just enough for me to hear it. "That's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I want you to know that I know. Whatever they're trying to build around you, I don't believe any of it. Not one word." My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and breathed through it. "Thank you," I managed. "I'm looking at flights," he said. "Not yet," I said. "Soon, but not yet." We stayed on the line for another few minutes, without much being said, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind that sons and fathers have when words are insufficient, and presence is what matters, even across 2,000 miles of telephone wire. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and thought about Victor's words from the week before. "They do not stop. They accelerate." Nathan said the forged signature needed formal verification. But Victor had already found something else entirely, something that collapsed the entire medical case Brandon had spent weeks constructing. Victor Reynolds had spent 22 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, which meant he had spent 22 years learning that the most dangerous lies were not the elaborate ones. They were the simple ones told confidently by people who had correctly calculated that nobody would check. He called me on Monday morning and told me to come to Nathan's office. I was there by 9. Victor had a single printed document on the conference table when I arrived, a California Medical Board license verification printout. He placed it in front of me without preamble and let me read it myself. "Dr. James Whitfield, license status not found." "He's not in the system," Victor said. "No active license in California. No record of a license that was revoked or suspended. He simply does not exist as a licensed medical professional in this state." My jaw tightened. I thought about sitting across from that man in his beige Westwood office, counting backward from 100 by 7s, recalling 3 objects in correct order, answering every question correctly, while he sat there with his frameless glasses and his calibrated warmth and his notepad writing things he had already been paid to write. The credentials he lists on his website. Victor continued, setting down a second sheet. Traced to a university in Nevada that the Department of Education shut down in 2019 for issuing degrees without meeting accreditation requirements. The institution sold credentials. It did not confer education. He paused. Whitfield also has a prior history. In 2018, he was investigated in Oregon for providing false expert testimony in a conservatorship case. The investigation was dropped when the petitioner withdrew the case, but the record exists. Nathan leaned forward from his end of the table. Brandon paid Whitfield $45,000 for a medical opinion. Under California law that constitutes suborning perjury, knowingly procuring a false statement for use in a legal proceeding. It's a criminal offense under Penal Code Section 127, separate from the forgery charges we're already building. $45,000, I said. The number sat in my chest like a stone. To make me look like I was losing my mind. "It would have worked," Victor said, and his voice carried no satisfaction in saying it, only the flat honesty of someone who has seen this kind of thing succeed before. A licensed neuropsychologist's report carries significant weight with a family court judge. If we hadn't checked, Whitfield's testimony would have been the cornerstone of the entire conservatorship case. Nathan had already prepared the filing. He walked me through it, a formal objection to the conservatorship petition, submitted to Judge Patricia Okafor's court, citing two independent grounds. First, the medical expert retained by the petitioner had been identified as an unlicensed practitioner whose credentials could not be verified through the California Medical Board. Second, the petitioner himself, Brandon Holloway, was the subject of an active financial fraud investigation connected to the very assets he was seeking to have placed under conservatorship. Under California Probate Code, a court is required to consider evidence of the petitioner's own conduct and interests when evaluating the merits of a guardianship application. Judge Okafor will have no choice but to pause the proceedings, Nathan said. She'll order an independent evaluation through the court's own appointed examiner. That process takes weeks, and it means Whitfield's report goes in the trash. He filed the objection that afternoon. By 4 o'clock, Nathan's office received a confirmation from the court. The conservatorship hearing was postponed pending further review. I sat in the conference room after Nathan stepped out to take another call, and I looked at this California Medical Board printout on the table. Dr. James Whitfield. Not found. I thought about the careful, unhurried way that man had watched me during our session. The way he had written in his notepad after each answer, never revealing whether he found the answer correct or concerning. The way he had shaken my hand when it was over and said he would submit his findings within 10 days. He had been performing competence. I had been demonstrating it. And without Victor, the court would never have known the difference. My hands sitting on the conference table were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the accumulated weight of the past 2 weeks pressing down at once. I pressed my palms flat against the table surface and took a long, slow breath. 40 years. I had spent 40 years in rooms where people tried to move numbers in ways that didn't belong, and I had always caught it. Duplicate invoices, misplaced decimal points accounts that didn't reconcile the way they should. I had a gift for finding the thing that was wrong. I had not caught this. Not in time. Not in my own life, in my own house, in my own safe. That hurt more than the money. Nathan came back into the room and read whatever was on my face with the ease of a man who has known his client for 11 years. "Gerald," he said quietly, "you caught it now." I looked up at him. "That's what matters," he said. "Not when, that you did." I nodded once. Then I picked up my phone because the same afternoon Nathan filed the objection. Claire Morgan had called from Wells Fargo, private banking, and her voice had the careful quality that people use when the number they are about to say is very large. Claire Morgan had managed my accounts at Wells Fargo Private Banking for 15 years. She remembered the name of my first dog, a black Labrador named Edison, that I had mentioned exactly once in passing during a meeting about estate planning in the year Eleanor was diagnosed. She had sent flowers the week Eleanor died, a simple arrangement of white lilies with a handwritten note that said, "Only." She sounded like someone worth knowing. She was the kind of banker that most people never find, and never deserve, the kind who treats your money like it matters, because she understands that money is never really about money. When Claire called and asked me to come in person, I did not sleep well that night. I was at her office in Century City by 8:45 the following morning. She was already there, the door closed behind her assistant, a folder open on the desk between us. She looked at me the way a doctor looks at a patient before delivering a diagnosis. Not with pity exactly, but with the careful steadiness of someone who has decided that the most respectful thing she can do is tell the truth without dressing it up. "Gerald," she said, $250,000 was withdrawn from your Pacific Growth Investment account over a period of 4 months. The withdrawals were processed using a wire authorization form bearing your signature. She turned the folder toward me and slid a document across the desk. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the authorization form. It looked like mine. The loop of the G, the way the H crossed slightly higher than most people expected, the particular slant I had developed sometime in my 30s and never bothered to change. It was a very good copy. It was not mine. The money moved through 2 companies, Claire continued. They exist only on paper, no employees, no physical offices, just registered names designed to make the trail harder to follow. From there, it transferred into a business account connected to Brandon Holloway's logistics operation. She paused. A portion of it, approximately $60,000, was used to make an initial payment toward the liability claim from the Beverly Hills jewelry store incident. The payment was processed before the insurance investigation had concluded. I sat back in my chair and felt the full weight of it settle over me. Brandon had not simply stolen money. He had used my money to pay for the damage his sister caused in a way that created a paper trail suggesting I had voluntarily accepted financial responsibility for the accident. Every transaction had been designed to tell a story in which Gerald Hutchison, increasingly confused and erratic, had been willingly funding his stepdaughter's legal troubles and funneling money into his stepson's failing business. If the conservatorship had gone through, that story would have been the official record. Who had access to my account information? I asked. The exact balance, the account number, the signature on file. Claire's expression shifted slightly. The authorization form matches the signature we have on file precisely enough that our standard verification process cleared it. Whoever prepared this document had access to a high-quality copy of your original signature and knew the exact account balance on the day of the first transfer. My wife, I said. She saw my statements. I left them on my desk at home. I didn't think... I stopped. There was no useful way to finish that sentence. Claire reached across the desk and placed her hand over mine. Her fingers were cool and steady, and the gesture had the weight of 15 years behind it. Gerald, she said, this is not a failure of your judgment. This is a deliberate, coordinated theft by people who studied you carefully. There is a difference. I looked at her hand on mine and thought about Denise's hand on my wrist at the birthday dinner, the grip that stopped me from moving, that told me publicly where I stood. 2 hands, 2 entirely different meanings. Nathan was waiting when I arrived at his office an hour later. I handed him the folder Claire had copied for me, and he read through it without speaking, turning each page with the methodical focus of a man building a case in his head in real time. When he finished, he set it down and looked at me. The forgery takes this to a different level, he said. Wire fraud under federal law separate from the state forgery charges. And the shell company structure, 2 entities with no legitimate business operations used solely to move stolen funds, that's money laundering under California Penal Code Section 186.10. He straightened the pages. Brandon wasn't just taking money, Gerald. He was constructing a legal architecture to make it impossible to trace and impossible to blame him for. Can we prove it? I asked. We can prove the signature is forged, Nathan said. I'll retain a forensic document examiner today. We can prove the shell companies have no legitimate business purpose, that's public record, through the California Secretary of State. He looked up. What we need is someone on the inside. Someone who can tell us exactly how those transfers were authorized and executed. I thought about that on the drive home. Someone on the inside of Brandon's operation. Someone who had been close enough to watch and careful enough to remember. The person who would break the entire case open wasn't a banker, a lawyer, or a former FBI agent. She was 31 years old, worked for Brandon, and had been quietly saving everything for months, for reasons that had nothing to do with loyalty to me. Ryan called me at 2 in the morning. I was still awake. I had been awake most nights that week, sitting in the study with the lamp on low and the account statements spread across the desk, going over things I had already gone over because the act of reviewing numbers was the only thing that made me feel like I still had any ground under my feet. When his name lit up my phone at that hour, my chest tightened immediately. Ryan did not call at 2 in the morning unless something had happened. "Dad," he said, and his voice had a quality I had never heard in it before. Not fear exactly, but the controlled intensity of someone who has just understood the full size of something and is trying to carry it carefully. "We have everything." I set down my pen. "Tell me." I had been contacted 2 days earlier through an encrypted email address he used for sensitive work communications. The sender identified herself only as a current employee of Holloway Freight Solutions, Brandon's company. She said she had materials that were relevant to what was happening to his father. She said she would only meet in person in a public place and only with Ryan. Not with a lawyer. Not with an investigator. With the son. They had met that evening at a diner in Torrance, a well-lit place on a busy street. The kind of location that a person chooses when they want witnesses without drawing attention. Ryan described her to me small, precise in her movements, with the careful posture of someone who had spent years making herself easy to overlook. She had arrived 10 minutes early and chosen a booth near the window. She kept her coat on the entire time. Her name was Emily Carter. She was 31 years old and had worked as Brandon's head accountant for 3 years. She had a degree in accounting from Cal State Long Beach and a gift for numbers that Brandon had recognized and immediately set about exploiting. She and Brandon had a personal relationship, Ryan said carefully. About 2 years ago, he ended it without warning. 3 weeks later, he told her the position was being eliminated. A pause. Then he called her back 6 months after that and offered her the job again at a higher salary with a different title. She took it because she needed the work. She knew what she was walking back into. She needed the money more than she needed to be safe from him. I closed my eyes for a moment. I thought about all the ways that desperation makes people accept things they know they shouldn't. "What did she bring?" I asked. Ryan began reading from the list, and with each item my hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles ached. Emily had saved everything on a personal external hard drive, not on company systems which would have flagged her access, but copied manually during late nights when Brandon had gone home. She had the original accounting files before they were altered, and the altered versions afterward, with timestamps that showed exactly when the changes were made and from which workstation. She had email chains sent from Brandon's company account, because Brandon had never imagined that Emily would betray him, and arrogant men rarely encrypt the communications they send to people they consider beneath them, discussing the shell company structure, the wire transfer authorizations, and the plan to redirect Gerald's money through accounts that would be difficult to trace. She had recordings. California is a two-party consent state, meaning all parties in a conversation must consent to being recorded. Emily understood this. She had not recorded covertly. In each of the 3 meetings she documented, she had activated the recorder openly on the table, identified as a standard voice memo device, which Brandon and the others had either ignored or assumed was for her own note-taking. Her presence and visible use of the device constituted implied consent under the circumstances. Nathan confirmed it when Ryan called him at 6 the following morning. The recordings were legally obtained and admissible. Emily had been careful in ways that Brandon, in his arrogance, had never thought to anticipate. In the clearest of the recordings, Brandon's voice was flat and businesslike as he said, "If anything goes wrong, we pin it on the old man. He'll be declared incompetent before he can fight back." In another, he had spoken to Ashley by phone on speaker, telling her that all she had to do was say she had panicked after the accident, that Gerald owned the vehicle, that she had believed she had permission. He takes the liability, Brandon had said. That's what he's there for. And there was one more. A recording from a morning meeting, Denise's voice unmistakable, asking whether they were certain I wouldn't notice the money disappearing from my accounts. Brandon's answer came without hesitation. By the time he realizes anything is wrong, everyone in his life will already believe he's losing his mind. That's the whole point. Ryan stopped reading. The study was very quiet. Outside, a dog was barking somewhere down the street, 3 short barks, and then nothing, and the silence after it felt enormous. She also gave me camera footage from the office, Ryan continued. Security recordings from the hallway outside Brandon's office. Victor can use them to identify the man who installed the hidden cameras in your house. She recognized him from the building. He did work for a security contractor Brandon hired about 4 months ago. Why? I asked. Why is she doing this? Ryan was quiet for a moment. I asked her that directly. She said, and I'm quoting here, Dad, she said, I'm not doing this because I'm a good person. I'm doing this because he told me I was disposable. I want him to understand what that feels like from the other side. I sat with that for a long time. I did not feel triumphant. I felt tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could reach, and beneath the tiredness, I felt something that was almost grief, not for myself, but for all the people in Brandon Holloway's orbit who had made the mistake of being useful to him. Ryan, I said finally. Yeah, Dad. Fly home. A breath. Then I already booked the flight. I land at LAX at 7:45. I set the phone down on the desk and looked at the Oregon coast painting visible through the study doorway. Eleanor's choice. The place where nothing bad could happen. I thought we have everything, and I thought now we need the right moment to use it. Nathan would provide that. He called the next morning with a plan that I had not anticipated and a name I had not expected him to mention. Ryan landed at LAX at 7:45 on Friday morning. I was waiting at the curb in the white Lexus when he came through the arrivals door, rolling a single carry-on bag, still wearing the work badge from his Manhattan office clipped to his jacket pocket. He had not taken the time to remove it. That small detail, the badge from a life 2,000 miles away, still attached, because there had not been a spare moment to think about it, hit me somewhere I had not expected. He saw me and walked straight to me and put his arms around me. He was taller than I was by 2 inches, had been since he was 17. And the particular way he held on one hand on the back of my shoulder, the way Eleanor used to when she wanted me to know she meant it, made my throat close entirely. I did not cry. But it was a near thing. You look tired, Dad, he said, pulling back and looking at my face the way young people look at their parents when they are frightened by what they see. I've been awake a lot, I admitted. That stops now, he said. We're going to fix this. Victor was at the house by 10. He spread Emily's materials across the dining room table, the accounting files, the printed email chains, the recordings on a secure drive, and the 3 of us worked through them methodically, the way I had once worked through quarterly audits at Meridian, one document at a time, cross-referencing everything. Ryan was quick. He had an engineer's mind, precise, systematic, allergic to assumptions, and he caught 2 things in the accounting files that even I had missed on first pass. Patterns in the timestamp data that showed the alterations had been made from 2 different workstations on the same day, which meant Brandon had not done it alone. Someone else in that office had been involved. Victor noted it without comment and added it to a list he was keeping in his own handwriting on a yellow legal pad. Then Victor opened the folder containing the security footage Emily had exported from the office building's external cameras. He had already done the analysis before arriving. He turned the laptop toward us and pressed play. The footage showed a corridor outside Brandon's Torrance office. A man in a gray company shirt entered the building at 9:13 on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks earlier, signed in at the front desk, and proceeded down the hallway with a tool bag over one shoulder. He was inside for 47 minutes. When he left, the tool bag looked lighter than when he had arrived. Victor paused the footage on a clear frame of the man's face. "He's a contractor," Victor said. "Works for a security installation company in El Segundo. Brandon hired the firm 4 months ago, ostensibly to upgrade the office's network infrastructure. This man's specific assignment per the company's own internal work orders, which I obtained through a subpoena request. Emily's information allowed us to justify was residential security assessment." Victor looked at me. "Your address was on the work order, Gerald, listed as a secondary residential site. How did he get in?" Ryan asked. His voice was flat, controlled, the way people get when they already suspect the answer. Victor set down the folder. "The work order lists the point of contact for residential access as the homeowner's spouse. Denise let him in. She told you afterward that she had scheduled a routine network check. Do you remember that?" I did remember. A Wednesday afternoon, 3 months ago. Denise had mentioned something about a technician coming to look at the Wi-Fi router. I had been on a call and barely registered it. I had not asked for the company's name. I had not asked to see an ID. I had trusted her. Ryan's jaw went rigid. "They put cameras in my house," I said. "3, Victor said. "Living room, hallway, and your study. We found them yesterday after Emily's footage gave us the make and model of the equipment. Standard residential units. The kind that upload wirelessly to a cloud account." He closed the laptop. "I've already contacted Nathan. He's filing a motion to preserve the cloud footage as evidence before it can be deleted." Ryan stood up from the table and walked to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to us, his shoulders rigid, and when he turned around, his eyes were bright in a way that he was working very hard to control. "They filmed you in your own house," he said. His voice was even. The evenness cost him something. "They put cameras in your home, cut the footage into something that made you look confused, and then presented it to a court as medical evidence." "That appears to be what happened," I said. "Dad." He crossed back to the table and sat down, and his voice dropped into something quieter and more direct. "I want you to hear me say this. I am not here because I think you need protecting. You do not need protecting. You have handled this more cleanly than anyone I know could have." He paused. "I am here because I should have been here sooner. And I'm not leaving until this is finished." My chest did something complicated that I did not have a word for. Sandra knocked on the back door at noon with a plate of sandwiches, turkey on sourdough, the kind she always made when she had decided that the people next door needed feeding. Ryan shook her hand and thanked her with the genuine warmth that he had always had for people who showed up when it mattered. "You look like your father," Sandra told him. "Same eyes. Same way of standing, like you're waiting for the ground to shift." Ryan laughed, startled by it, a real laugh, the first I had heard in weeks, and the sound of it moved through the kitchen and did something to the air in the room that I could not entirely explain. That evening, after Victor had gone, and the materials were locked in Nathan's office by courier, Ryan and I sat on the back porch in the cool December dark. The jacaranda tree had lost the last of its leaves. The pool cover caught the light from the neighbor's Christmas decorations 3 houses down. "I wasn't stupid," I said to the backyard. "I want you to know that. I know it looked that way." Ryan turned to look at me. "It didn't look that way to me. I was lonely," I said. "After your mother. I was lonely for a long time, and I made decisions from that place." "Dad." His voice was steady and full. "Being lonely isn't a character flaw. It's what happens when you lose someone you built everything with." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Mom would have said the same thing. You know she would have." I did know. Eleanor had never had patience for self-punishment. She would have told me to stop apologizing for being human and get back to work. I looked at my watch, my everyday watch, a simple Seiko I had worn for years. The Patek was still out there somewhere, but not for much longer. The next morning before breakfast, Victor called. He said he had found the watch. My father bought that Patek Philippe in 1971. He had saved for it for 3 years, which was not something he ever told me directly. I learned it from my mother, years after he was gone, in the particular way that widows eventually begin sharing the stories their husbands never thought to tell. He wore it every day for 30 years, through good contracts and bad ones, through 2 recessions and 1 bankruptcy scare that he never fully discussed, and that I only understood the scale of after I had spent a decade in finance myself. When he died, he pressed it into my hands in the hospital room and said something I carried with me for 30 years without fully understanding it. I understood it now. I had kept it in my safe for 20 years. I had told myself I was saving it for the right moment, standing in the Beverly Hills Jewelry Exchange on a Saturday morning in December, looking at my father's watch through a glass display case. I understood that the right moment had never been what I imagined it would be. Victor had called at 7:30. During his 22 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, he had developed working relationships with several county and municipal databases that he retained access to as a licensed independent consultant, among them the Los Angeles County Pawn and Second-Hand Goods Registry, which required all licensed dealers to log high-value items within 24 hours of acquisition. He had run this Patek's serial number, which I had provided from my insurance records, through the database the previous afternoon. The watch had been logged 4 days after the safe was emptied. Sold to the Beverly Hills Jewelry Exchange on Rodeo Drive by a young male seller, price agreed at $28,000. The watch's fair market value was considerably higher than that. Whoever sold it had needed the money quickly enough to accept a significant loss. We arrived at the exchange at 9:15. It was the kind of establishment that existed at the quieter end of Rodeo Drive. No flashy signage, just a small brass plate beside a door that opened into a room where things were displayed with the particular reverence of objects that had outlasted people. The owner, a man in his 60s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the careful manner of someone who has learned through experience to be neither suspicious nor surprised, confirmed the purchase from his records and pulled the security footage without being asked. Victor watched the footage on the store's backroom monitor and pointed at the frame without a word. I looked. Brandon. Dark jacket, the same restless set to his shoulders. I had watched across dozens of family dinners. Standing at the counter with the watch in a cloth bag, pushing it across the glass, with the slightly too casual manner of a man, pretending he did not know exactly what he was giving away. The owner led us to the display case and unlocked it. There it was. The same brushed steel case I had held in my hands in a hospital room 30 years ago. The same dark face, the same small subsidiary dials my father had explained to me one afternoon at the kitchen table when I was 11 years old, showing me how the mechanism worked with the patient thoroughness of a man who believed that understanding how things functioned was a form of respect for them. My hands were not steady when I reached into the case. I did not try to make them steady. There are moments when steadiness is the wrong response. The owner packaged it carefully, with the particular attentiveness that people in that profession develop for objects they recognize as meaning something beyond their price. Victor paid for his coffee from the small carafe the owner had set out, an old-fashioned courtesy I found unexpectedly moving, and we walked back to the car. Victor drove. I sat in the passenger seat with the small box on my lap and did not open it immediately. I watched Rodeo Drive pass outside the window, the Christmas decorations strung between the lampposts, the unhurried Saturday morning shoppers, the city conducting its ordinary business, and I felt the particular grief of a man who has recovered something he should never have had to lose. Then I opened the box. The watch lay against the velvet, the way it always had. I picked it up, the weight of it, the precise weight I had known since I was a child, and something in my chest that had been clenched for weeks simply released. My eyes burned. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment and breathed through it. A man should own one thing that outlasts him. I put the watch on my wrist for the first time in 20 years. The clasp closed with the same small, definitive click I remembered from my father's hospital room. I sat for a moment and looked at it against my wrist, and I thought about everything it had survived to get back to me. "Dad would have liked you," I told Victor. Victor kept his eyes on the road. "I'll take that," he said. That evening, Reverend Thomas Ward came to the house. He did not call ahead, he simply appeared at the front door at 6 o'clock, with a thermos of coffee and the expression of a man who had learned when his presence was needed without being asked for it. Ryan let him in. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, and Reverend Ward poured coffee into 3 mugs and pushed 2 of them across the table without ceremony. "Tomorrow," he said, looking at me. "Tomorrow," I confirmed. He looked at my wrist, at the Patek Philippe, sitting there at the particular way I was holding my arm with it, the way you carry something recovered. He nodded slowly, the nod of a man who understands that some things are not about the object itself. "You're not going there as a victim," he said. "You know that." "I know," I said. "Good." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "Because victims hesitate, and hesitation tomorrow will cost you the only thing they haven't managed to take yet." Ryan looked at me across the table. I looked at the watch. The Meridian Ballroom held 230 guests. Brandon had a reserved table near the stage. He had absolutely no idea that we had already spoken to the event organizers. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning and knotted my tie. It took 3 attempts. Not because my hands were shaking, they were not, but because I kept stopping midway through to look at the Patek Philippe on my left wrist, and each time I looked at it, I lost the thread of what I was doing. After the 3rd attempt, I finished the knot, straightened it once, and made a decision not to look at the watch again until I needed to. Ryan appeared in the doorway behind me, already dressed, holding 2 cups of coffee. He held one out without saying anything, which was the right instinct. Some mornings do not need to be narrated. I took the cup. We stood there for a moment, father and son, in a bathroom mirror at 6 in the morning, and I thought about all the years Ryan had not been in this house, the decade after Eleanor died, when I had rattled around these rooms alone, the 2 years of this marriage, when he had visited carefully, the way you visit a place you are not certain is still the home it used to be. "You nervous?" he asked finally. I considered the question seriously. "I was a CFO for 30 years, I said. "I've walked into rooms where the number on the table could have ended the company. I've delivered results that made grown men cry." I paused. "Yes, somewhat." Ryan almost smiled. "Good," he said. "Means you understand what's at stake." Nathan arrived at 8:30. He sat at the kitchen table with his briefcase open and went through the evening's sequence one final time, the way a surgeon reviews a procedure before entering the operating room. Not because he had forgotten any of it, but because the review itself was part of how he prepared. "You are not going tonight to accuse him," Nathan said, looking at me steadily. "You are going to present documented facts. You say what you can prove. You do not characterize, you do not editorialize, and you do not lose your temper regardless of what he says or does." He closed his briefcase. "The moment you show anger, Gerald, you hand him a narrative. A confused, emotional older man making accusations at a public event. That is exactly the story he has been building. Don't give it to him. I won't, I said. Arthur is confirmed, Nathan continued. He'll be at his table by 6:30. Claire has the documentation. Emily will arrive separately with her materials. Victor will be positioned near the back with Detective Sandoval. He looked at his watch. Everything is in place. Tonight you walk in, you say what is true, and you let the evidence carry the rest. Sandra knocked on the back door at 9, which was unusual for a Sunday, and I opened it to find her standing there, with a foil-covered plate, and an expression that told me she had been up since before I had. "Breakfast," she said, stepping inside and setting the plate on the counter without waiting to be invited. She pulled back the foil to reveal scrambled eggs and sourdough toast, the kind of meal that a person makes when they want to say something they don't have words for. "Sit down, both of you." Ryan sat. I sat. Sandra stood at the counter and poured herself coffee from the pot, like she had been doing it in my kitchen for years, which she had not, but which felt entirely natural. "Sandra," I said, "you don't have to." "I know I don't have to," she said crisply. "That's why I'm doing it." She leaned back against the counter and looked at me with the direct regard she used when she had decided that something needed to be said. "Gerald, I have lived next door to you for 11 years. I watched you take that woman and open this house to her children, pay for things that were not your obligation to pay for, and do it all without asking for anything in return, except to be treated like you belonged here." Her voice did not waver, but her jaw was tight. "You belonged here before any of them arrived. Don't you forget that when you walk into that room tonight." My throat tightened. I looked at my eggs. "Thank you," I said. "Eat," she said. Arthur Sloane called at 11. His voice on the phone had the unhurried quality of a man who had made his peace with the evening ahead. "I've listened to that voicemail 40 times, Arthur said without preamble. "Brandon Holloway told me directly that you were losing your grip, that I should consider making other arrangements for my payroll before things became complicated." A pause. "I've done business with you for 19 years, Gerald. In 19 years, you have never once made a mistake on my books. Not one." "I appreciate that, Arthur." "I'm not saying it for your benefit," Arthur said, with the brisk affection of a man who does not do sentiment easily. "I'm saying it because tonight, if anyone in that room tries to suggest otherwise, I intend to stand up and say so myself. I wanted you to know ahead of time." After Arthur's call, Reverend Ward phoned. His message was brief. "Remember what you told me that first evening in the church," he said. "You said you wanted people to know the truth. Tonight they will." A pause. "Go do what needs doing, Gerald. I'll be here when you get back." Ryan drove. Nathan sat in the passenger seat, which meant I had the back seat to myself, which I was grateful for. The Meridian Ballroom was downtown 40 minutes from Bel Air on a Sunday evening, and I spent most of the drive looking out the window at the city, the way Los Angeles spread itself out in every direction, without apology, all those lit windows and moving cars and lives conducting themselves at full speed, entirely unaware that anything particular was happening in one of them. I thought about Eleanor. Not with the grief that had shadowed me for 10 years, but with the specific warmth of someone who has finally stopped being afraid to remember. I thought about the last business event she had attended with me, a company dinner at a hotel in Pasadena, 1998, the year we almost lost the Morrison contract. She had sat beside me the whole evening, and every time I started to look worried, she had reached under the table and squeezed my hand once, just once, which was her way of saying, "I see you and you are going to be fine." My left hand was resting on my knee. The Patek Philippe was on my wrist. I turned at once, feeling the weight of it, and something settled in my chest that had been unsettled for weeks. Ryan pulled up to the Meridian's entrance and cut the engine. The building was lit for the occasion, warm lights spilling out through the tall glass doors, cars being valeted in a line, well-dressed guests moving through the entrance. "No matter what happens in there," Ryan said, and his voice had the particular quality of someone choosing words with precision. "I want you to know that I am proud of you. Not for tonight. For all of it. The way you handled it." I looked at my son. "Your mother would have liked watching you say that," I told him. He pressed his lips together. His eyes went bright for just a moment before he got it back. "Yeah," he said. "She would have had something to say about it." I opened the car door and stepped out into the December evening. The air was cool and dry the way Los Angeles air gets in winter, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I did not feel like I was walking towards something I needed to survive. I felt like I was walking towards something I needed to finish. Brandon was already near the stage when I came through the doors. He saw me across the room and smiled immediately. The full, confident smile of a man who had calculated all the variables and believed every one of them had landed in his favor. I had no idea that we had already spoken to the event organizers. He had no idea what was on Arthur's phone. He had no idea that Emily Carter was already seated 3 tables from the stage with a folder on her lap. He had no idea that Claire Morgan had documents that would be on the screen in 40 minutes. He smiled at me across a room full of people, and I looked back at him, and I did not smile. I walked toward the stage. Before I tell you what happened inside that ballroom, and I promise you nothing went the way Brandon expected, drop a 16 in the comments so I know you made it this far. 230 people were in that room. And what happened next changed every single one of them. Stay with me. Dad Family Revenge. This story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational value. Any similarity to real names or settings is purely coincidental. But the truth at the heart of it is something most of us have lived in one form or another. The Meridian Ballroom looked exactly like every business awards ceremony I had attended in 40 years. Round tables with white linens, centerpieces of winter greenery, coffee service already circulating, the low sound of 200 conversations running beneath orchestral background music that nobody listened to, but everyone would notice if it stopped. Men in good suits moving through the room with the practiced ease of people who attend these things, often enough to know where the bar is and how to find a seat that keeps their back to the wall. The only difference was that tonight, the man being honored had stolen from me. Brandon was at the front of the room near the stage, working the space the way men like him work spaces, moving from group to group, a handshake here, a shoulder grip there, laughing a beat too early at things that were only moderately funny. Dark suit, no tie, which communicated the specific kind of confidence that says, I am important enough not to need formality. Denise sat at the reserved table near the stage, composed and still. Ashley sat beside her in a blue dress I did not recognize, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes moving around the room in a way that was not quite relaxed. I took my seat at a table near the center of the room. Ryan sat to my left. Nathan was 2 tables back near the aisle. Victor stood near the rear doors with Detective Sandoval, both dressed well enough to look like guests, and positioned carefully enough to cover every exit. Brandon glanced over and saw me. His face did something complicated in half a second, surprise, then recovery, then the smile, full and assured, the smile of a man who had run the numbers and believed every one of them had landed in his favor. He raised his glass slightly in my direction. A performance. I looked at him and did not move a muscle in my face. The program moved on schedule. Sponsors were thanked. Scholarships announced. Then the master of ceremonies introduced Brandon Holloway. Brandon took the stage to applause. He spoke for 4 minutes about integrity, about leadership, about the obligation that successful people had to the communities that supported their rise. He used the word family 3 times. He mentioned his mother once warmly, and Denise pressed her hand to her chest, as though the sentiment had genuinely moved her. I sat with my hands flat on the white linen and listened to every single word. The master of ceremonies stepped forward with the award plaque. Brandon reached for it. The room did not go quiet immediately. It went quiet in stages, the nearest tables first, then rippling outward conversations, dropping away one by one, until only the background music remained, and then even that seemed to pull back. I walked to the stage. Brandon's smile recalibrated into something more careful. He turned toward the audience with a short laugh. "I think my stepfather would like to say a few words," he said smoothly. "Gerald has been going through a difficult time. We're all very supportive." I stepped up to the microphone. "I am not here to ruin this evening," I said. My voice came out level and clear, the voice that 40 years in conference rooms had built. Not loud, but the kind that fills a space because it means exactly what it says. "I am here because my presence in this room has been used for several months as evidence that everything in my marriage and my finances was perfectly normal." I paused. It was not. Brandon moved toward me. "Gerald, I'm almost finished," I said, and something in my tone stopped him. I discovered that money I believed was paying for educational expenses had been redirected into a private business account. I discovered that $250,000 was withdrawn from my investment account using a forged signature. I discovered that a petition was filed with the Los Angeles Superior Court to have me declared financially incompetent, supported by the testimony of a man who holds no valid medical license in California. These matters have been reported to the appropriate authorities and are under active review. The room went entirely still. Arthur Sloane stood up. 73 years old, moving with the unhurried pace of a man who has stopped needing to hurry. He held up his phone without reaching for a microphone. "Before anyone draws conclusions about Gerald Hutchison's state of mind," Arthur said, "they should hear a voicemail I received 11 days ago from Brandon Holloway." He pressed play. "Arthur, I don't want to alarm you, but Gerald has been showing some signs of confusion lately. Nothing dangerous. But I thought you should know before payroll season, in case you wanted to consider making other arrangements. Just looking out for you." Arthur lowered the phone. "I have known Gerald Hutchison for 19 years. In 19 years, he has never made a single error on my books. Not one." He looked directly at Brandon. "I know the difference between a man who is losing his mind and a man someone wants me to believe is losing his mind." He sat down. Brandon stepped forward, voice smooth. "Ladies and gentlemen, my stepfather has been under enormous emotional stress." A chair scraped. Claire Morgan stood from a table left of the stage and held up a document. "I'm Claire Morgan, private banking director at Wells Fargo. The forged wire authorization Gerald mentioned is confirmed. I have the forensic signature analysis. The signature is not his." The screen behind the stage came to life. Security footage of Brandon opening my safe with a copied key, accounting files before and after alteration timestamps highlighted. Wire transfer documentation, shell company registrations, funds flowing from my accounts through 2 paper entities into Brandon's business. Emily Carter walked up the side aisle and stepped onto the stage. Her hands were entirely steady. "My name is Emily Carter. I was head accountant for Holloway Freight Solutions for 3 years. I have the original financial records, the altered records, and documentation of internal meetings in which the plan to redirect Gerald Hutchison's funds was discussed explicitly." She reached into her folder and removed a recorder she had placed openly on the conference table during those meetings. Brandon had seen it and said nothing, a mistake built from arrogance. The recordings were made with the device visible to all participants. Nathan Pierce confirmed their admissibility this morning. She pressed play. If anything goes wrong, we pin it on the old man. He'll be declared incompetent before he can fight back. Several people at nearby tables leaned toward each other. A man in the second row set down his coffee cup very slowly. Victor stepped forward and presented the camera evidence, work orders, contractor records, installation footage, and explained quietly that access to the Bel Air residence had been arranged by the homeowner's spouse, who had let the technician in under the pretext of a routine network check. Brandon's composure was fracturing. His jaw worked. His hands moved at his sides. He started toward the podium. That was when Ashley stood up. She rose slowly, the way a person rises when their legs are not entirely reliable. Her face was the color of paper. Her hands, pressing flat against the table, were trembling so hard I could see it from the stage. 6 hours earlier, through her own attorney, who had received Nathan's documentation that morning, Ashley had learned that Brandon filed a legal declaration, placing sole responsibility for the Beverly Hills accident entirely on her. Not shared. Sole. The hit and run, the DUI, the property damage. All of it. Signed by Brandon weeks ago, prepared as insurance for exactly this moment. The brother who promised to protect her had packaged her as the liability. Her voice when she spoke was not loud. The room did not need it to be. My brother told me Gerald would take the blame. He said all I had to do was say I panicked. That Gerald owned the car. That Gerald would be responsible. She stopped. When she continued, her voice cracked at the edges but held. He told me I would be protected. He told me that was the plan. She looked directly at Brandon. He lied. Brandon lunged toward the podium. Detective Luis Sandoval and 2 uniformed LAPD officers came through the side door. Brandon stopped moving. His chest heaved. His eyes swept the room, the faces, the screen, Arthur with his phone, Claire with her folder, Emily at the podium, his sister with tears running freely down her face and her hands still pressed against the table as though she needed it to stay upright. Sandoval crossed the room without hurrying. Mr. Holloway, he said. The handcuffs closed at 10:47. The sound was very small. In a room that had gone entirely silent, it carried to every corner. The board president stepped forward and quietly announced that the award presentation would be postponed pending further review. One lender retrieved his jacket and left without a word. A developer who had shaken Brandon's hand 40 minutes earlier walked toward me instead. Gerald, he said quietly, are our accounts secure? They always have been, I said. They will continue to be. He nodded and returned to his table. Denise had not moved. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes directed at the white linen, and she did not look at me, and I did not require her to. I stepped back from the microphone. Ryan was waiting at the edge of the stage. He put his hand on my shoulder once briefly, the way Eleanor used to, which meant, I see you, and you are going to be fine. I covered his hand with mine for a moment. Then I walked off the stage, and the Meridian Ballroom began the complicated business of understanding what had just happened inside it. Brandon Holloway was arrested at 10:47 in the evening. I know the exact time because I looked at my father's watch the moment I heard the handcuffs close. The investigation that followed took 11 months. I want to be honest about that because stories about justice have a way of compressing time, making consequences feel swift and clean when the reality is considerably messier. 11 months of depositions, forensic accounting court filings, and conversations with Nathan that often ran past midnight. 11 months of watching a case be built the way all serious cases are built, one documented fact at a time. Brandon was charged under California law with forgery, money laundering, grand theft conspiracy, unauthorized computer access, and conspiracy to commit conservatorship fraud. The charges were not filed all at once. They accumulated as the forensic accountant, Nathan retained, worked through the records. His job, as I explained it to myself, was simple in concept and brutal in execution. Follow every dollar through every account it touched until the picture was complete. What he found confirmed what the documents had suggested. The money had not simply been misappropriated. It had been systematically redirected through a structure designed to make it untraceable, and the paper trail designed to make me look responsible for all of it. Brandon's logistics company filed for bankruptcy in February. His personal assets, the house, the vehicles, the investment accounts were liquidated to partially satisfy his creditors. The private lending group that had been pressuring him received a fraction of what they were owed. Brandon received a sentencing recommendation that Nathan told me without satisfaction was appropriate to the conduct. Judge Patricia Okafor formally dismissed the conservatorship petition in January, within 2 weeks of the Meridian evening. She also issued an order restoring full control of all my accounts and financial instruments, and a separate order requiring the preservation of all digital evidence connected to the case. In her written ruling, she noted that the petition had been founded on fabricated medical testimony and submitted by a petitioner who was himself the subject of a criminal investigation. A conflict of interest. So fundamental, she wrote, that the court was compelled to question how it had progressed as far as it had. I kept that paragraph. I framed it. Dr. James Whitfield was referred to the California Attorney General's office for prosecution under Business and Professions Code Section 2052, practicing medicine without a valid license and for perjury. He lost the Westwood office, the framed diplomas, and whatever remained of the careful performance he had constructed around himself. Ashley accepted a plea agreement in the Beverly Hills hit-and-run case. She surrendered her driver's license for 3 years, completed 200 hours of community service, and entered into a restitution arrangement with the jewelry store's owners. Marcus Webb wrote a follow-up piece in the Los Angeles Times that treated her more gently than her conduct had warranted, which I thought was probably the right call. She was 24 years old. She had been used by her brother as a tool and then as a scapegoat. That was not nothing. Emily Carter was formally protected under California's Whistleblower Protection Act, Labor Code Section 1102.5. She was not prosecuted. She found a new position at an accounting firm in Pasadena within 3 months of Brandon's arrest, a fact I learned from Victor without asking for it. Denise and I finalized the divorce in November. Because we had signed a prenuptial agreement before the marriage, a document my attorney had recommended, and that I had signed without fully appreciating how much I would come to need it. Her claim on my separate property was limited. The court's findings regarding her knowing participation in the conservatorship scheme further constrained what she could reasonably request. She moved to an apartment in Culver City. We did not speak after the papers were signed. I recovered the majority of what had been taken. Not all of it. Attorney's fees consumed more than I had hoped, and some of the money Brandon had moved had been spent in ways that made full recovery impossible. Justice, I had learned, is not free. It is also not always complete. One evening in December, after the last of the paperwork had been filed, and Nathan had called to say that the active phase of the case was essentially concluded, I sat alone in my study with a glass of scotch and the framed paragraph from Judge Okafor's ruling on the desk in front of me. I was not celebrating. I was not grieving. I was doing something quieter than either of those things, taking stock, the way I had always taken stock at the end of a fiscal year, understanding where I stood and what remained to be done. I had lost a marriage. I had lost nearly a year of my life to this. What I had not lost was the thing they had most wanted to take. 3 weeks later, I sold the Bel Air house. I did not look back when I drove away. The only thing on my wrist that mattered was already there. The house at Lake Arrowhead was smaller than my garage in Bel Air. It had a porch that faced the water, a kitchen that smelled like pine and cedar, and absolutely no room for anyone I had not chosen to let in. I moved in on a Thursday in early December, with 2 carloads of books, a filing cabinet, and the Patek Philippe on my wrist. I left the furniture. I left the artwork. I left everything that had been selected to impress people I no longer needed to impress. The first morning I made coffee and took it out to the porch and sat there while the lake came slowly into light. A pair of ducks moved across the far edge of the water without any apparent agenda. The mountains beyond were dusted with early snow. I did not think about Brandon. I did not think about Denise. I thought about Eleanor, which was different, the good kind of thinking, the kind that warms rather than burns. Ryan drove up from Los Angeles for my 66th birthday in late December. He brought cheesecake from a bakery in Silver Lake, the kind Eleanor had made every year, dense and slightly tangy, the kind that tastes like someone's mother made it, because someone's mother did. We ate it on the porch with coffee while the lake held the last of the afternoon light. "Do you regret it?" Ryan asked. "Any of it?" I held my coffee cup in both hands and thought about it seriously, the way the question deserved. "No," I said. My kindness wasn't the mistake. The mistake was believing that kindness didn't need a boundary. Ryan turned that over for a moment. "Mom would have said something like that," he said finally. "She would have said it better," I told him. He smiled. The kind of smile that is also an ache and also a gift. I looked at the watch on my wrist, the pale winter light catching the face of it. The same face I had looked at in a hospital room 30 years ago, when my father pressed it into my hands and told me a man should own one thing that outlasts him. I understood finally what he had meant. He had not meant the watch. Looking back, I understand something I wish I had known sooner. Kindness is not weakness. And love, real love, never needs to arrive with instructions attached. I gave freely because I believed I was building something real. I was not stupid. I was lonely. God has a way of showing you the truth at exactly the moment you are ready to see it. And when I finally saw it, I stopped paying for a family that had never truly let me in. Do not mistake someone's study of your loneliness for love. That is the only thing I want you to take from my story. Family stories of revenge are rarely about revenge. They are about the boundaries we fail to draw until the cost becomes undeniable. Family drama and revenge resonate because most of us have felt it, the quiet devastation of generosity that was never returned. These family stories of revenge exist to remind us reclaiming your dignity is not cruelty. It is simply self-respect arriving late. My honest opinion, set the boundary before you have to prove you should have. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for watching until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements built to illuminate the truths we rarely say out loud. If that is not for you, choose what serves you best. No hard feelings.